Well, our final speaker before lunch is someone that I've had a long association with and a great deal of respect for, and that's Jim Wallace, the chairman of the Australian Christian Lobby. Jim was the organisation's inaugural chairman, inaugural managing director, way back in about 2001. Before retiring as a brigadier in the Australian Army after a 32-year military career, which included peacekeeping deployment in the Middle East, Jim served as commander of Australia's elite SAS unit, and he was the commander of the Mechanised Brigade in Darwin. He made an enormous sacrifice while at the top of his game in his military career to raise a Christian voice into the politics and parliaments of our nation. I had the privilege of working there for 10 years under Jim's leadership and his mentoring, and I'm blessed to call him a friend, and I'm delighted that he accepted our invitation to speak to us today. Would you please welcome Jim Wallace?
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to say, Margaret, that I'm on the other side of 70 and I'm especially encouraged to see you and to hear you. So thank you very much indeed, and to see your generation coming through. Lyle, it's very kind of you to give me that introduction. I can tell you that as the Family First, you are very, very fortunate to have this man. There are a few people in Australia for whom I have more respect, okay? My question is, can the tide be turned, okay? And I clearly would not have had that role in starting ACL, in Lachlan Macquarie and Human Rights Law Alliance if I didn't believe it can be turned. Okay? I understand that some people think it might be too big a job, you know. But when you look at all the nonsense that we've heard about this morning, and I was going to repeat some of it here, but it's unnecessary because it's been covered pretty comprehensively. When you look at all this nonsense, let me say it has to be turned. Right? You know, the thing is that a lot of it is has a veneer of we're expected to show tolerance. All this one-way tolerance has been pointed out by a couple of speakers. But you've got to remember that tolerance is not necessarily a good thing. It has been explained as or described as a necessary evil to protect evil. A necessary evil to protect evil. And if you think about it and you go back to Germany before the war, then you can see that people are encouraged to tolerate the fact, not object to the fact, just tolerate the fact that the Jews have been taken off out of their homes and going to no one knew where. And then before long, they were compromised by the ordinary person. And then a little bit later, not long, they were complicit in it. Right? Tolerance is not necessarily a good thing. And if you're here today because you're sick of tolerating this nonsense, then I really encourage you to keep that motivation. What we've heard today, and we've heard it from most of the speakers, is examples of what are lies, okay? And the trouble is with lies that you don't start to live morally until you stop lying. You refuse to lie, whether you're tolerating them or you're speaking them. And so our moral life requires that we actually oppose these lies. Again, it's been said that what we're looking at today is really the tolerance of insanity. And it is. It is a reality, you know, that we are looking at the willful destruction of common sense. The willful destruction of it. And we're here in the middle of it. So, can the tide be turned? It's got to be. And as we look at that, and we look at Family First, and I am so encouraged that Lyle's leading this, that I think you have to look at both the political environment and the faith environment as you try to do that, because the tide can be turned, and thankfully for you and I as Christians, it's not only reliant on us and our ability. So just looking quickly at the political... Gee, it's funny, I brought up all these things to try to impress you, and I don't know how they work. I forgot to turn on the checker to this man down here. I thought might. Yeah, when you get hungry, that's right. So if I look at this political secular environment, I think you as a political party have a number of advantages, okay? The major advantage you have is that we're in a democracy, okay? And it's a participative democracy. And therefore, really, as the voice shows, if you get people to participate, right, then it's very likely, in fact, I'd say it's absolutely certain, that they'll come down on your and my view of the world. I don't get too carried away with the fact that these recent census have showed that Christianity is falling, or those who believe in Christianity is falling. Because the reality is that the activists got the question, no religion, right, put right up the top. So if you're going through it quickly, of course you're going to tick no religion if you haven't been to church for a while. But it says nothing about where your values come from, right? Which we would have seen before as people said, oh, I'm an Anglican, right? Because that's their value system. So the first advantage is that you've got that, or the advantage is that we're in a democracy and it's a participative democracy, and we saw that in the voice. We saw how that's an advantage to us. The disadvantage is we're in a democracy. We're in a democracy, unfortunately, where all the people have a very short attention span to things political, right? And they tend to be persuaded in the end by personal advantage to themselves, right, in terms of politics. And that's a disadvantage. But still, we just got to take count of our advantages and disadvantages and work to strengthen the effect of the advantages and try to counter the disadvantages. Every contest goes really to the one who uses the current situation to their best advantage. In other words, you look honestly at the situation before you. And I'd really encourage you, don't go following, right, down some view you'd like things to be, right? But look honestly at the situation before you as a party as you go out. Key leverage that you have over this situation is, first of all, you have the key differential that everybody's after, and that is truth. You ask anybody up front and they'll tell you they want to know the truth, right? And so that is a key advantage that you have. People know this. We heard from Tom this morning about power, right? We know it about climate change. You get into a private conversation with anyone, right? And very few, really, will be fully on board with climate change and the view that's pushed down people's throats. Same on societal values. Same on defence, right? People are smart enough to vote the way they did in the Voice referendum, and you'll find most of those people, I'm sure, are with us on the issue of or the side of most of our issues. The thing that's missing in this leverage is that people have no one to rally around. Right? And if you're the ones that are standing up as a party, right, as a rallying point, then I guarantee you'll get people come towards you. It might not be a rush at first, but it will be in the end, okay? Because our great disappointment, and the fact of disappointment of most Australians, is there's nobody talking the truth. There's nobody to rally around. And I know this man certainly will provide that. You have an advantage too in the fact that there's a loss of faith in major parties at the moment, right? And we all know that. All this polling confirms that. We're quickly going to the sort of European situation where you're going to have minor parties holding the balance of power much more than they have. Well, federally they haven't, but much more than they have in Australian political history, right, at either state or federal level. If you think about even the US election at the moment. You know, people are sitting there, even though their system doesn't allow them really a choice of minor parties. Right? It does, but only in theory. But people are sitting there trying to pick the lesser of two evils. What a situation to be in. Right? But in Australia, people will be looking for minor parties. Right? And so stand up, people will rally, is speaking truth. Right? The danger is, if you're not there, is that they will vote for either the Greens or the Teals. Right? So I really salute all of you in getting behind Lyle and Family First, because we've got to have people voting for other than the Greens and the Teals. They need a credible alternative. Even your name, Family First, that resonates with everybody. I've always thought it was the best name in Australian and New Zealand political terminology, you know. And the thing is that, too, that weaknesses abound on the other side. Right? If you've got these advantages, then there are weaknesses on the other side. I've just come from that SAS regiment that I commanded so long ago. We had our 60th anniversary as a regiment this week, and they invited me back there to speak to them. And it just reminded me again, you know, that as a soldier, if we're on a battlefield, one of the first things you've got to identify is the weaknesses of the enemy. You don't go and ply yourself against these strengths. How stupid that'd be. They did that in World War I, and we all know the results. Right? So you find what his weaknesses are. And the biggest weakness for these fellows is their overreach, right? The arrogance. Right? If you can speak so much without truth, without fact, as they do, then they're in an amazing moment of overreach. And that's the weakness. Right? And I really encourage you, as you put together your policies and all the rest of it, that you look at this weakness and you push back on it. Right? Because a weakness is something that once you get on it and you push on it, right, you can push through and then you can get your words out. You can get your policies out. But you've got to find the breaking point. Right? And the sort of overreach they have at the moment, I mean, this man-woman thing is a nonsense. Everyone in Australia knows it's a nonsense. If there's one thing that Australians still hold as sacred, unfortunately, it's sport. And the sort of nonsense we saw in the Olympics, you know, despite the fact that the press went cold on it, almost immediately it was over. Right? The fact that you had men bashing up women in the boxing and then popping up in various other of the sports as well, it wasn't only that one, really offended people. Right? And so this is a weakness of theirs, absolutely. Right? Something that the population are not going to be with them on. And you've got these magnificent testimonies of people like Chloe Cole and Australian people too who have been affected by women who have been detransitioned, had their breasts cut off, as we heard earlier today. I mean, I just don't believe this. And the average Australian doesn't believe it. But it's got to be exposed to them and it's got to be pushed back. It's got to be made an issue. Freedom of religion and conscience, you know, as Margaret's been telling us, the two go together. And we happen to live in a democracy and we're proud of that, you know. So we need to push back on that. Right? We need to highlight it, right? That freedom of religion and conscience are really the same thing, right? And push back. I remember Howard once saying to me, he said, or to a group of us, he said, I can't understand. Who would have thought, he said, who would have thought that a Catholic school couldn't be a Catholic school? But this is where we are. You know? This is an insane weakness. You know? Absolutely insane. You know? And so we need to push back on the insanities because that's where we can break through, or you can break through. The climate change response. I'm not ignorant of the fact that the climate's changing. The climate's changed throughout history. I'm not ignorant of that at all, but I don't agree any more than Tom does about the reasons and the attributions that they make for those changes. And so we do need to push back, and we need to push back in the way that I think certainly Tom has said this morning, that it's costing us all because power is at the base of everything. It's a factor in the cost of everything. So we need to push back on that basis. The other thing I think that's really important, and it's an advantage for you, is that the methods have changed by which you can go away and do this, you know. First of all, the narratives. You know, the narratives are really strong. They've been recognised for ages as being really strong in any sort of political or community advocacy. Right? And they abound now, as I said. Chloe Cole, right? The narratives of parents have not been able to talk to their children about what they see as their gender. Right? We need to get these narratives out there, and they're on your side. Right? You can also, these days I'm told, you know, we've all been brought up in the last few years to think social media is the answer to everything. Well, more recently, talking to someone who's deeply involved in the political game, they've told me that, and this bloke's about to be, is pre-selected, so he's about to compete in the federal election. And he said, you know, we're being told that the really important thing to do is to door knock, right? It's face-to-face. People have actually lost trust in social media. And with AI and everything else coming on, they're going to lose more faith in it. Right? They're going to trust it more. And suddenly, they want to see people at the front door, knocking on it, right? Talking to them, a person, right? You're at a size, and I imagine that suits, you know, your budget to be able to do that thing, but it's on your side, right? I encourage you to use it. You know. In the natural, I suppose, it's time for an organisation like Family First, and it can turn the tide, I've got no doubt. But what are the faith component in this too? Right? It can't be only about adopting smart political strategies and methods, right? This is the ultimate advantage for any fight for truth, right, is our faith. It's the act of faith, you know, it's actually believing, right, that you can change this to start with, right? It's the courage that we know. We've been encouraged through all the examples of great people in the Bible to have in concert with faith, right? And as a result of our faith. If you think about those great people in the Bible, and you think about, you know, we've almost got a sort of Sunday school sort of image of courage through these people. And I think it's quite wrong, you know, because we think, you know, Gideon went out there with a sword and he killed half of those 10,000 himself, you know. Well, I bet he didn't. As a soldier, I can tell you he wouldn't have. These blokes would have done it. And we think that Joshua did the same thing, I'm sure, in our minds, you know, but he was obviously too old, you know. But if I just take the example of Joshua, I've commanded, as Lyle said, I've commanded a brigade, so, you know, 3,500 people, all the tanks and armoured vehicles, all that sort of stuff. Now, I've not commanded it in war, but I tell you, even on peacetime exercises, it is absolutely hectic. You get almost no sleep, you know. And the actual command post, when it's putting together, and it's always putting together, it's always planning ahead. And when it's putting together a plan, you know, it gets really tense, you know, people get sort of short with each other, all that sort of stuff. And I can just imagine that Joshua's headquarters would have been like that, but 10 times. Because every decision that Joshua's headquarters are making as they're trying to come up with a plan to bring down or to defeat Jericho, every decision they make, they know is going to take blokes' lives. Blokes say no. Blokes' wives say no. And families, you know. And so it's really weighing on people. And then just think about it for a moment. Joshua comes in, having been spoken to by the angel. He comes in and he says, oh, listen, fellas, thanks for all that planning. It was really good, thanks. But we're going to walk around it for 6 days. 7th day, going to blow the trumpets. The wall's going to fall down. So don't worry about the planning. You know, that took courage, all right, but that took the sort of courage that's called, or we're called upon to show now, moral courage. Right? Moral courage to do what you know God is calling you to do. or us, okay? You for family first. So moral courage, we've really got to get back, okay? But in all that, and it's come up a couple of times today, and I agree with the Archbishop, that we must make sure that our method never, ever conflicts with what we know is the way Christ would want us to act. We must represent Christ. The early church was in the situation we're in now as far as its position with culture, but it went out courageously and with love. And look what happened. Look how many Christians there are in the world now. In conclusion, we're at a confluence here of natural advantages for you that say it's time as a party. It really is. It mightn't happen all this time, right? But it's time for a minor party to stand up for values, right? We are in this situation of the willful destruction of common sense. We have an assault on foundational freedoms. We have people searching for people they can trust, right? And you can stand up as those people. We just need people courageous enough to do it. Right? And if the church doesn't stand up here, it not only misses a huge, perhaps one-time opportunity, but it betrays its purpose before Christ. Right? And I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared to do that. I know Lyle's not prepared to do that either. Yes, the tide can be turned, and I thank you for accepting the challenge of that. And I just want to read something to you, which I think is not out of the Bible. It's something Roosevelt said, right? And he said it to give people encouragement and courage, right, for entering into the tough fight. It's called "It's Not the Critic Who Counts." Theodore Roosevelt, once President of the United States. He said, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled, or when the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in the worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or defeat." I've just been back in the SAS regiment, and I can tell you, I've been with blokes like that. I've been with this bloke for 7 years. I think you were with me as Chief of Staff. And I can tell you, this bloke is one of those. Yes. Okay, and I know that as you rally around him, you'll honour that, right, and reflect that sort of approach and make sure that family first goes forward. Remember, it won't all be done this time. I once... I'm probably over my time, am I? No. I had an aunt who only knew me till I was about 3. I never saw her much. I lived in Brisbane. She lived down in Sydney. I think I probably saw her once, actually. Of course, I don't remember it at 3. But years later, or that aunt died at 34. And I never did see her again after I was about 3. And years later, I was talking in a church down here in Sydney, and a little old lady came up to me at the end of the talk, and she said, "I thought it might be you." She said, "Your aunt was my very best friend." And she said, "I want to tell you that she was the most beautiful Christian lady. And I want to tell you that she prayed for you, that you would come to Christ all the time." Eh? I didn't come to Christ till I was 19 or 20, you know. And so I would just say to you, we've got to do things in God's time too, okay? But they have effect if we maintain our faith, maintain our courage, right, and trust in God and do it in His time. God bless you. Thanks.
Don't go away. Jim, just want to say thank you so much for that today. It's been very inspirational. I felt like I was back in an ACL staff meeting, and I thought you were about to bring out the centre of gravity diagram. Christopher knows he was inducted into ACL that way. There was no new thoughts in ACL after working under Jim. Jim, we really appreciate you've really highlighted to us, I think, from a very strategic point of view through your military analysis, that there are strengths and weaknesses that we can exploit on the battlefield, and it's important for us to think that way. Really appreciate that. I think your encouragement to us to stick to the truth and to use that advantage that we have, and that people will rally towards us, and to be patient in that, I think, in time. Jim, you said something also very important, and I think this is important to all of us on a personal level, but it's also important to our nation, and that is you don't start living morally until you stop telling lies. And the heart is more deceitful than all else. I think we all have the capacity to tell ourselves lies if we're really honest. But we do live at a strange part of our nation's history where we're telling lies in the public square and in the political square, and it's to our detriment. So really appreciate that that encouragement, Jim. So would you please join me in thanking Jim Wallace for being with us today? Thank you.